They thought you were replaceable, that someone else could step in and do what you did, that your presence was simple, ordinary, easy to find again. But what they didn't expect was how different everything would feel without you. At the beginning, you never saw yourself as special. You just cared. You showed up. You listened when they needed someone. You stayed when things got difficult. To you, it felt natural. But to them, it became normal. And that's where the problem starts. Because when someone gets used to your effort, they stop recognizing its value. What once felt meaningful slowly becomes expected. Most people never notice this shift. The more consistent you are, the less rare you seem. The more you give, the less they question it. Until one day, they start believing something dangerous. That they can find this anywhere. So they pull away. Not always in a dramatic way. Sometimes it's subtle. Less attention, less appreciation, less effort. But they still assume you'll stay the same. And when that assumption grows, so does their confidence that losing you won't matter. Maybe they even test it. They distance themselves. They act differently. They start treating you like you're no longer a priority. And deep down, they believe one thing. If you leave, it won't be hard to replace you. Have you ever been in that position where someone treated your presence like it didn't really matter? Where everything you gave started to feel invisible? Because here's the truth most people don't realize in that moment. Being easy to replace is often just an illusion created by comfort. They don't see your value clearly because they've never experienced your absence, and that changes everything. Because the moment you're no longer there, reality starts to feel very different. But what happens next isn't what most people expect. Because when someone finally tries to replace you, that's when they begin to understand something they completely overlooked. At first, you don't fully accept what's happening. You feel it, but you don't want to believe it. Because how does someone go from valuing you to acting like you're replaceable? So your mind starts searching for answers. You replay conversations. You think about moments that once felt real. You go back to the times they made you feel important and try to match them with who they are now. But nothing lines up anymore, and that's where the confusion begins. Because when someone slowly disconnects while still being present, it creates a strange kind of emotional tension. You're not fully left, but you're no longer truly valued either. Most people never notice how damaging this stage is, because it doesn't feel like a clear ending. It feels like something fading, without explanation, and that lack of clarity forces your mind into a loop. You start questioning yourself. Did I change? Was I not enough? Did they find someone better? And the more you think, the more uncertain you feel. This is what emotional shock looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and heavy. Because one moment, you believed in the connection. The next, you're questioning if it was ever real. And that sudden shift breaks something deeper than just feelings. When trust starts to fade like this, it doesn't just hurt your heart. It changes how you see people. It makes you more careful, more observant, more aware of how easily someone can take what you give and treat it like it's nothing. And here's the hardest part. You don't get closure. No clear reason. No honest explanation. Just distance and behavior that doesn't match what you once believed. So your mind keeps going back, trying to understand something that no longer makes sense. But this is where something important begins to happen. Because while you're sitting in that confusion, something inside you is starting to wake up. Not loudly, not all at once, but slowly. Because pain like this has a hidden effect. And this is where everything begins to change. And then something inside you starts to shift. Not because everything suddenly makes sense, but because you're tired of trying to make sense of it. You begin to see the pattern, the way they slowly pulled back, the way your effort stayed the same, while theirs disappeared, the way you kept adjusting, just to keep the connection alive. And for the first time, you stop asking, why are they doing this? And you start asking something more powerful. Why am I allowing this? This is the moment emotional awareness begins. It's not loud. It doesn't come with anger or dramatic reactions. It comes with clarity, a quiet realization that you've been giving your energy to someone who stopped valuing it. Most people never reach this point because it requires letting go of the version of the story you wanted to believe and accepting the one you're actually living, and that acceptance changes your behavior. You stop chasing. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who already experienced it and chose not to appreciate it. And then you do something unexpected. You choose silence, not the kind of silence that comes from confusion, but the kind that comes from understanding. You don't argue. You don't demand answers. You don't react the way they thought you would. And that's where everything changes. Because they were expecting something completely different. They expected you to get emotional, to question them, to try harder to hold on. They expected control. But something else happened instead. You became still. You pulled your energy back. And without that energy, the dynamic they were used to starts to break. They can't read you anymore. They can't predict your reaction. The person they thought was easy to replace is no longer easy to access. And that creates a shift they didn't see coming. Because control doesn't disappear through confrontation. It disappears through detachment. And when someone loses access to your energy, something unexpected begins to happen. At first, they don't react. They tell themselves it doesn't matter. They convince themselves they've already moved on. Because when someone believes you're easy to replace, your absence doesn't feel real right away. But then, time passes, and something starts to feel different. The silence you chose doesn't break. The attention they were used to doesn't come back. The emotional access they once had is gone. And that's when it begins to settle in. Not all at once, but slowly. Because absence has a strange psychological effect. It removes the comfort people took for granted and replaces it with awareness. Without you there to respond, to care, to reassure, they're left alone with their own thoughts, and that's where everything starts to shift. Most people never notice this part. When you were present, your value felt normal to them. It blended into their routine. But once you're gone, your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. They start remembering things differently. The way you showed up, the way you listened, the way you stayed, even when it wasn't easy. And now, there's nothing there to replace it in the same way. Because real connection isn't easy to duplicate. But by the time they begin to see that, it's already too late. This is where regret quietly begins. not always expressed, not always admitted, but felt, because now they see the difference between what they had and what they thought they could easily find again. And the gap between those two realizations, it stays with them. This is the emotional consequence no one talks about. People don't always regret immediately. They regret when the absence becomes real, when the distraction fades, when the replacement doesn't feel the same, and that's when something unexpected happens. They start questioning their own actions. Without you there to soften their behavior, they begin to see it clearly. But here's the truth. Their realization doesn't change what already happened, and it doesn't bring back the version of you that once stayed. Because while they're just beginning to understand your value, you've already started becoming someone else. And the most surprising part isn't their regret. It's who you become after the pain. By the time they begin to understand your value, you're no longer the same person they once knew, because something inside you has changed. Not in a loud, obvious way, but in a quiet, powerful way that most people never notice. You stopped needing their validation. You stopped looking for answers that were never coming. And slowly, you started choosing yourself. This is the final transformation. It's not about becoming cold. It's not about shutting down your emotions. It's about understanding them. You feel everything, but you're no longer controlled by it. That's emotional strength. You no longer react the same way. You no longer chase the same people. You no longer ignore the same red flags, because now you see clearly. And this is where self-respect begins to take root, not in what you say, but in what you no longer tolerate. You set boundaries without explaining yourself. You walk away without needing closure. You protect your energy without feeling guilty. And that calm detachment, that's your power. Most people think strength is proving a point, winning the argument, making the other person regret everything. But real strength looks different. It's quiet, it's controlled, it's unbothered. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving someone wrong. It's reaching a point where their actions no longer affect you at all. And that's when everything fully changes. Because now, you're not reacting to them anymore. You're responding to life differently. You grow, you evolve, you become someone who no longer depends on temporary people for permanent peace. And the person they thought was easy to replace becomes someone they can never access again. Not because you're hiding, but because you've outgrown the version of yourself that once stayed. So now I want to ask you something. Have you ever become stronger after someone underestimated you? Have you ever reached a point where walking away felt more powerful than holding on? Take a moment and think about it. And if this message connected with you, share your experience in the comments, because sometimes your story might be the reminder someone else needs to finally choose themselves.